Good morning, everyone. I've been tasked here this morning to tell you about the green transition in a data-driven way. I come from a very different world. Suits are not my usual attire. I come from a startup world. And I'm going to hopefully try to inspire you a little bit about what the startup world is doing differently and how we're attacking this topic heads-on. So a little bit about myself so you know a bit where I come from. Roughly speaking, I'm an engineer and a data scientist, so I've been coding since I'm a kid. I've been looking at data as sort of the ground truth in order to take meaningful decisions. It is something that's very, very important to me in order to make sure that we get away from having battles of slogans when we're talking about the green energy transition and actually do something very meaningful as the problem is huge. 4 years ago, I quit my previous company in order to start a new company called Tomorrow, and this is a bit the journey I'm gonna get you through. It starts very simply looking at the biggest challenge of our time, which is the temperature rise that you all know about. I don't know how many have seen this graph, which is in the last 11,000 years that showcase the temperature increase. You can actually see we're heading towards a little ice age, as they call it, and then suddenly we're expelled out from it on a curve that is almost vertical. So what is worrying here is not too much that the temperature changes, but mostly that we've taken almost a degree of warming in just a couple of decades, and this is what is worrying. As an engineer and as energy engineers, we understand that the Earth is a complex ecosystem, and if you put that much energy in that little amount of time, something wild is gonna happen, and you have a lot of people that are trying to figure out exactly what is going to happen. But the truth is, we've never experienced anything like that. This is a new experiment that we're running on Earth. What it's caused about, again, super long time series here showcases the CO2 concentration. And you see, of course, this spike, incredibly vertical since the Industrial Revolution. The only thing I'll say about CO2, which we all should keep in mind, is that CO2 stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, up to actually millennia. So this means that everything we're putting out there right now, we're going to need to suck it back, or we're going to leave it to our children or grandchildren, so it has to be considered as debt. Everything we do right now when we drive our cars emits CO2, it's debt. And the worst part is, we're actually accelerating. This is a zoom in from the 90s. You see the curve is increasing, and the latest projections actually showcase that we're towards 2.7% increase. What does the Paris Agreement tell us? That the target should actually be minus 5% per year. So we're basically 7 to 8% percentage points off our targets. It's like driving a car and seeing a cliff in front of you and just accelerating even more instead of braking up, right? And of course, this is not just to rant and say we're not doing anything. The question is, what should we be doing and why is it so hard? Why it's so hard is basically because we're addicted to fossil fuels. And again, the curves show almost unstoppable growth in the fossil fuels. The low carbon technologies are at the bottom, taking uptake, super important. But still, an order of magnitude that I like to throw out is if you imagine a 100% renewable world and you imagine, for example, the Tesla Powerwall compared to its fossil fuel equivalent, the Tesla Powerwall can store approximately 10 to 15 kilowatt hours of energy, which is the same as, roughly speaking, a liter of oil. The cost of this thing is, what is it, thousands of euros or more, something like that. Weighs 200 kilos. You look at how much a liter of oil costs. You look at how much it weighs. You get the portability for free. So that just shows why it's so difficult to get rid of those fossil fuels. And the last thing I'll say about this topic is that we actually came from a 100% renewable world. We used to chop down trees in order to burn them to get heating. We added coal on top, we made steam engines, created our economy, then we added oil, we added gas, and so on and so forth. So that's why it's so hard to get rid of it. And this is why we see, for example, her, that I guess you all know. Who knows about Greta Thunberg, right? Everyone, I think, has heard the latest speeches she gave. There's something very interesting that she said. I'm going to quote her. The real danger is when companies and politicians are making it look like real action is happening, when in fact, almost nothing is being done apart from clever accounting and creative PR. Extremely harsh words to hear. The question is she right or not? right? Is real action happening? And again, when I'm taking this curve and you sort of overlay all the COP that have happened, as a data scientist, I look at this thing and I say, every time there was an event that happened, has it changed our trajectory? And unfortunately, the only conclusion you can have here is no, not so far. It's even worse, actually. It's accelerating, right? What about clever PR? Say one thing here. If you look at, for example, the 100%, so who here has a 100% renewable energy contract? I thought more people would. One thing here is we all know how those contracts work. We all know very well that in real time at each hour, there's no way we can get 100% renewable electricity, at least in most of the countries, simply because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. And it's a great scheme. The only problem it has is that it confuses people. If we want to have a data-driven green transition, we need to make sure that everyone is well educated on what is needed in order to be 100% green all the time. And we're talking about storage solutions, we're talking about interconnectors, and this is something that needs to be out there. The incentives need to be out there such that we're focusing on the right thing. Second, zero emission vehicles. Same thing, we've had discussions with companies that basically tell us you have an EV, no matter where you charge it from, it's always going to be green. Please don't start telling people that if you charge my electric vehicle on coal-based electricity, it's all going to be good. And if you look here, I mean, this is a chart that basically showcases that even though an EV is always better than its traditional equivalent, between Poland and low-carbon electricity like Sweden or France, you have a factor 3. So again, if you want the most bang for the buck, you have to look at data here. Else, you're just throwing out money out the window. So in all of this confusion and all of this urgency, we need a guide. We need something, a place, a central place that is able to tell you on a data-driven basis what is the good thing to do. And this is the company that I set out to build 4 years ago now with the very, very large ambition of centralizing all this data to enable individuals to take informed decisions and to make sure companies as well can make informed decisions. Our mission statement is quite simple. It's to organize the world's carbon data and make it widely accessible and useful. For those, maybe some of you recognize that the mission statement is very, very close to the one that Google has. Google, you take the carbon out and you basically have Google's mission statement. And this is not a coincidence. Basically what we need, in my opinion, is that we need to commoditize access to data. We need to make sure that it's so simple that anyone who's curious to know what is the footprint of X can just look it up. And the second part is no one understands what a kilogram of CO2 is. No one has the right orders of magnitude for those things. Only experts have. We need to make it widely accessible. Use products that make it intuitive for everyone to understand those things. And lastly, the best minds of our generation, unfortunately, I don't want to pick on Google necessarily, but too many bright minds are working on things that are completely useless. They're basically making us click on more ads. Instead, we're trying to poach all those people and make sure that they work on the most important problem of our time, climate change. So we started somewhere, and basically the solution to climate change is to electrify everything, right? We want electric planes, electric cars, electric heating, electric everything. And as you already can hear from my previous speech, what about electricity, right? Is it clean? Do we actually know where it comes from? So we built this product, which is called Electricity Map, 3 years ago now. Who has already heard about Electricity Map? All right, lots of people, great. So actually a lot of things has changed with Electricity Map in the past 3 years. We have had a lot of contributions, but actually let me show you a small demo as I'm good on time. So this is an open access. You can download the app as well. You go to electricitymap.org, and what this map shows you is in real time what is the carbon intensity of the electricity network that you're coupled to. Basically, if you had to charge your electric vehicle, how much would you emit? And the color shows how much CO2 equivalent is emitted in the process. And we can zoom in on Denmark, and we have all the arrows that showcase the interconnectors to the various countries. And you can see, for example, here we're importing in Denmark green electricity from Norway, we're also importing green electricity from Sweden, and we're importing some less green electricity from Germany. I can press on West Denmark here. I can see that, for example, here, the wind is currently blowing at half capacity, generating green electricity. And you can see here the history over time. So basically, we're centralizing all of this data throughout the world in an open source fashion. So what does open source means? It means that the code behind this system is open. Anyone can look at it. Anyone can make suggestions. Last week, we had our 2,000th contribution to the system. Basically, someone either translating the map, telling us where data is, or actually coding the system that gets a new country on the map. And I'm very humbled to see sort of a whole community looking at those things and helping us improve it every day. We made a time lapse of this that showcases how the system evolves over time. What I love seeing here is actually the wind patterns, and you see how Ireland and Denmark especially start blinking as the wind starts blowing more and more, and you see Germany with the daily patterns of the solar generation. And basically this is very simple, but we're making something that was complicated to understand to everyone in a very, very intuitive fashion. And so we're publishing those visualizations once a year. We have 1 year time lapse that is produced like this. And then we build this into an API. So what does that mean? It means that if you have a system that is connected to the internet, consumes electricity and is flexible, then it is able to participate in accelerating the green energy transition. It should be coupled to a system that basically tells it in the next 24 hours, is it going to be green or not? When should I charge my electric vehicle? And it should do it automatically. When should the heat pump run? And so we build an API around this and are starting to experiment with a lot of different customers about those topics. And because this is a very educated audience, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we do those things and the data behind it. There's one key component here, which is the marginal origin of electricity. If you want to charge your electric vehicle at the optimal time, you need to look at the marginal origin of electricity, or the marginal carbon emissions. So what happens is when this electric vehicle demands additional electricity from the system, it's not all the units that will increase their production, right? It's only the marginal one. It's the one that is the cheapest and still has spare capacity. And this is the merit order curve that shows us in this particular example that coal will be the marginal generator. Now, unfortunately, this curve is market sensitive data. It's not something we have access to. And so I'd love to have Energinet give us access to it, but of course there's a lot of problems related to that. So we're using machine learning in order to try to estimate what is the unit on the margin. And this is the mathematical formulation. So basically what we're looking at is we take historical data, all the historical data we have for all of Europe, for all of the countries, and we look at when there's a change that happened from 1 hour to the other, why did that change happen? And it can happen for two reasons. It can happen from reasons that are independent of changes in load and reasons that are dependent. Basically, from 1 hour to the other, the wind can start blowing. Your wind turbines will generate more, your load will change. On the other hand, from 1 hour to the other, you might have an increase in demand in the system. And the response of the system is basically how was that demand met. And by separating those two signals using machine learning, we can basically estimate where does the marginal origin of electricity come from. And it's even more tricky because the system, the European system, is so well interconnected that we have to figure out, was the marginal power plant, was it local in the same grid? Or did it come from a neighboring country through an interconnector? And long story short, we can build this matrix that shows, for example, for DK2 here, so East Denmark, what is the statistical measure, what is the probability that the marginal origin is created locally, or that it comes from Norway, or that it comes from Sweden. And this thing varies from hour to hour, which enables us to predict these two curves, where the blue one is the carbon intensity of the grid, so that's the color you'd see on the electricity map, and the orange one is the marginal one. So basically saying, if you charge your electric vehicle, where does that marginal electricity come from? And here in the case of DK2, the marginal is actually often very low because of the import from low carbon electricity from Sweden. Without generalizing, on average, this is what we can see from the data is happening. So it's an interesting approach. Instead of having a bottom-up model, we're actually looking at things from a data perspective. We're just letting the data tell us what has happened, what is typically happening. And an interesting conclusion we can draw from this is to say, where should we install wind turbines? So as a thought experiment, what we did is, imagine you had the choice to install renewables in a given country. When you install a wind turbine, when the wind blows, something else is going to be reduced. That's the marginal power plant that produces less of its energy. And so using the marginal curves, looking at when do renewables produce electricity, you can basically look at this curve that says how much CO2 reduction do I get depending on where I put the wind turbine for a given year. So this is a kind of data-driven analysis that makes it extremely interesting to know on a macro level where should you invest your money if you want the maximum amount of CO2 reduction. Switching completely gears, we are also using this data to engage citizens and consumers who up till now have had a very opaque relationship with their electricity retailer. Basically, they flip a switch, they want the lights to be on, they don't even know really where the electricity is coming from, they just know it's a bill they're paying. What we're experimenting here with a partner called Barry in Denmark is to showcase to the end user, where does your electricity come from, how clean is it going to be in the next hours, and maybe you should start your washing machine at the right time or your dishwasher at the right time. And can those consumers even help us balance the system? This is something that we'd like to try out. And what we've seen is that the green incentive is much more powerful than the economic incentive that we're putting out there. What we discovered in this process is that a lot of people care about climate change. They just don't know how to act. The question I get most often when I talk about those things is, I fly a lot, I know I'm a bad person, what should I do, what can I do, how worse is it? And so we're trying to answer that question by expanding everything we did on electricity map, but on everything else in your life. So basically, what if you had an app that could automatically calculate your personal carbon emissions based on your everyday activities, and could we scale that to organizations to make sure that organizations can take data-driven decisions again? So we're building this app called Tomorrow, and I'm going to show you a little bit how it works. It looks like, on the left screen, like an app store. You have various services that you couple to them. For example, if you have an Uber account, you connect to Uber. Every time you take a ride, a taxi ride, it goes into the app. We calculate the CO2 emissions, and now we know the emissions of everything you took that's related to taxi, for example. We're going to connect to other things like smart meters, to TripIt. TripIt is a system that looks at your emails, figures out all the receipts you have already there to understand your transportation systems. And based on that, we're slowly building up your carbon footprint in a completely automated way. And so I want to draw your attention to the middle screen, which is, for me personally, one of the most exciting screens we currently have in the app that showcases my personal electricity usage. The top graph shows when I used electricity. The color of it is the same color of the electricity map that showcases that, for example, when I woke up around 7, 8 a.m., I probably started the dishwasher after my breakfast and used a lot of green electricity. 2 hours before, you can see the bottom graph shows you the fossil share. It would have been twice as bad, right, from 10 to 20%. And so that's extremely interesting. And we're also educating people on where electricity comes from. At the bottom, you can see there was a lot of wind. A third of my electricity that I use personally at home came from wind. Hydro was all imported, Norwegian and Swedish hydro. And you even have a little bit of nuclear at the top left, this yellow color you see. And that's the Swedish nuclear that we're importing. And lastly, we're enabling people to become carbon neutral if they want to do so by compensating for their emissions. So basically, we're going to connect to all the systems that have been digitalized in order to make sure that we sort of have, again, a data-driven basis to take decisions. Connect to smart meters, to electric vehicles. We have started integrating with bank accounts. So every time you do a transaction, you go to the bakery, the transaction goes in, and we figure out, okay, you just bought bread, so we know it's bread and can put an impact on that. Transportation cards. I took the metro just to come here. In the app, I got a notification that told me, hey, you just emitted 2 kilos by taking the train. So we're starting to tell people and put them reference points on what does a kilo of CO2 mean? How hard is it to actually get to sustainability? And everyone is probably thinking at this stage, you're gonna know everything about me, it's horrible just building another Google, and you're gonna sell me more ads and target things. And this is why we understand very clearly that if this is to be successful, this app needs to know everything about you, so it has to be private by design. So what this means is the app is connecting to Uber. The app is connecting to your smart meter directly. Nothing goes through our servers. There's no way we can get access to the data. If you lose your phone and you haven't taken a backup of it, your data is lost with it, which is also another problem that we're tackling. But I mean, this is the trade-off we're having when we talk about privacy, right? And this is extremely important for us. The second part is it's open source. So we're reusing exactly the same thing that we did with electricity map, where we had thousands of contributions. And this means in this particular context that if you know how to code the integration with, let's say, Lyft or some other app, then you can just submit it to us and it will directly go into the app. So we're building a movement of, say, geeky hackers that are looking to change their life for the better, and they are coding the systems together with us because they are asking for such a system. Finally, it gives us an objective. I talked a little bit before about the 5% a year degrowth that we need to have in emissions. Basically, if you take population projections and you divide it so you take our total carbon budget and you divide it by the number of expected people on Earth by 2030, that gives you a very, very clear number, which is called 5 tons CO2 emission per person per year. This is a target that we need to reach. Is that a lot? Is that not a lot? I'll invite you to download the app when it's out. We're launching this winter, and you can figure out exactly how far you are from that objective. We live in an extremely interesting period of humanity. There's a lot of negativity around climate change in general. The younger generation are worrying that we're screwing everything up. I tend to see this more as an opportunity. Never before have we had so much uncertainty about the future, but uncertainty is opportunity as well, right? We can choose what to do, and at this stage, we really have to empower ourselves, and we can be the first generation that said we knew what was happening and we actually did the right thing. And to illustrate this, for me, there's a monument that very well illustrates it in Iceland. Lately, this summer, you had a glacier that lost its status as a glacier. And they put this monument, I'm going to read it out loud because I found it beautiful. In the next 200 years, all of our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know, so you as a future generation, if we did it. So, of course, let's do it. Thank you very much.